Is it up on your end? Is it up on your end?
Oh, I just have to say, the delay is incredibly big.
On the YouTube?
Yeah,
Not surprised.
like at least 3 seconds.
Wow.
Oh, and you can hear me.
Right now? Good evening, everybody. Before we get started with tonight's show, there's just a few thoughts that I wanted to try to share before we get into the program proper. Um, Obviously, today has been an incredibly tragic day, not only for the province of Saskatchewan, but for all of Canada, and particularly First Nations peoples. There's been a lot that's gone on today, and the name that keeps coming back to me throughout the day is the name Sunil Tripathi. Now, there's a lot of you probably haven't heard that name, but who Sunil Tripathi was shortly after the Boston Marathon bombings, the internet decided that they were going to try to get ahead of the criminal investigation that was going on at the time. And through a Reddit forum, there was a group of people that decided that they had identified who one of the bombers were, and they named Sunil Tripathi. It turned out incredibly tragically because Sunil Tripathi's family they were the recipients of death threats, they were the recipients of rape threats, and nobody could find Sunil Tripathi at the time. And the reason for that was he had committed suicide days prior to the bombing even happening. He had nothing to do with the Boston bombing. But because the internet had decided that they were going to try to out-police the police, they unfortunately put his family through an incredible amount of hardship. Earlier today, we tweeted out that we were not going to be putting out any sort of commentary on the situation that was not coming directly from verified sources like the RCMP or legitimate journalists. And we appreciate all the DMs that we got. We appreciate all the DMs that we get. But I just wanted to take a sec to sort of remind everybody that it's really, really important in these sorts of situations to not cause undue harm, that we make sure that the information that we're getting and the information that we're sharing is from reliable, accurate sources, especially when there is a police investigation that's ongoing, and especially when there are situations where there are people who could be really, really hurt. The reality is that the two suspects involved in today's senseless attacks are still at large, and there's a whole lot that we don't know. This is, like I said, it's an unbelievably tragic situation. It is both simple and complex at the same time. It's simple because anybody should be able to look at this and go, this is a tragedy, and we need to wait until we have the right information and we know the actual facts before we start spinning off and trying to make sense of it. But it's also incredibly complex because there are a lot of moving parts involved. There are a lot of social complexities that are involved, and a lot of people don't know how to navigate that. I know that I don't. One of the things that I like to go to in situations like this when I don't know what to do is I look to people who have more lived experience with these sort of things, and whether we're talking whatever the situation is. But one of the tweets that was most impactful for me today, one of the things that I saw on social media that was most impactful for me today, came from an account that both I and The Breakdown follow. He's a First Nations gentleman who goes by the name of Terrell Tailfeathers, and he tweeted out, it's not the first time he's tweeted this out. I wish I could confidently say that it'll be the last, but it won't be. He tweeted this out. So we're just going to let this hang on the screen for a couple of minutes before we get into the show proper, and then we'll get into our regular programming. All right, going to be a bit of a hard switch tonight, but we have a lot to cover in the realm of Alberta politics. That's what we're going to be talking about for the most part tonight. I want to welcome everybody who's listening on Twitter Spaces. I also want to welcome everybody who's watching. We're hopefully streaming. Fingers crossed. But we're welcoming everybody who's watching the live stream on YouTube. If you're watching this video after the fact on Facebook, or if you're listening to the podcast version, thank you so much for joining us. We have so much to talk about. And we're going to be joined a little bit later on by Deirdre Mitchell-McLean. We haven't quite figured out how to get her video live streamed in, but we do have her audio figured out, and we've got a picture we're going to be throwing up. So there's that too. Want to start off with some good news, and this is why I say it's a bit of a hard switch. But there were a couple of good things that happened in the province of Alberta. Perhaps one of the biggest ones that kind of slipped through the cracks was the fact that there's been some pretty significant changes to terminology that are used in Alberta courtrooms. So the title change was announced by the Honorable Mary T. Moreau, who is the Chief Justice, and she announced that they were making a change of title from Master in Chambers, to refer to judges, to Applications Judge, for applications judges, which makes a whole lot of sense for a whole lot of reasons, because Master in Chambers carries some pretty heavy connotations with it. And the Honorable Mary Moreau was very clear that these changes were being made because of inclusion, equality, and diversity. So it's a pretty remarkable thing that this happened at the same time as we have Tyler Shandro picking fights in all of the big ways with all of the legal people. So we also saw that criminal defense lawyers walked out this week in regards to a lack of financial support for legal aid. So for those of you who are not aware, legal aid provides legal services to people who otherwise don't have the big money to spend on lawyers. Now, legal aid in Alberta works a little bit differently than most people are aware of, because when most people think of legal aid, they think of the American model, where somebody goes to work for legal aid and that's their job. That's not what happens in Alberta. In Alberta, practicing lawyers take time and they say, you know what, I'll do this amount of hours for legal aid, and they get paid, not a whole heck of a lot, for doing that work. Well, the problem is that they're not getting paid a whole heck of a lot, and secondary to that, there aren't nearly enough people who are able to provide this service. And this is putting the legal aid lawyers under significant stress. It's also making it more difficult for people to access legal aid in a timely manner. And so this week, we saw a boatload of lawyers across the province walk out of the courtrooms to draw attention to the fact that there are huge funding issues within the legal aid universe. We moved pretty quickly from the good news of the title change. Moving on from there. And this is my personal favorite of the night. And I say this because I have very close source of information on this one. The ex-Minister of Infrastructure, Prasad Panda, was out door knocking in his constituency in Calgary this week. And he was handing out flyers. Now, these flyers were very, very clearly targeted more towards his Minister of Infrastructure days. And in particular, there was one heading on the flyer that caught at least one person's attention, and that one person said, "Hey, so you're bragging about investing 1.5 million in the Keystone XL pipeline. Didn't that kind of turn out to be a bit of a disaster?" Now, normally I don't do anecdotal sort of stories of sort of, well, this is what happened, but in this particular situation, I will, because it was actually my dad who got handed this flyer. And my dad asked Prasad Panda, "Hey, so, Keystone XL didn't turn out too well for you guys. Why are you handing out these flyers?" And Prasad Panda's response was effectively, "Well, I had a bunch in the office that I needed to get rid of." Which is a fascinating campaign strategy, to say the very least. Other things that happened this week, it was back to school. And Adriana LaGrange came out in classic Adriana LaGrange fashion with some tweets, some commentary that was not particularly well received. The tweet that she put out on the first day on September 1st was, "It's disappointing to see some individuals within the education system and the public playing politics on what for many is the first day back to school. School authorities are extremely well funded." It's probably easier for her to say that, given that it was her ministry and her government that removed the ability to track class sizes. But the reality is teachers are not particularly well funded. Class sizes are continuing to grow. And especially with the heat that we've seen across the province in the last couple of weeks with kids going back to school, ventilation was a problem. And there were a lot of teachers who responded to that tweet. This one, though, is the absolute favorite. It's simply titled, "Teaching in Alberta." It's a DeWalt fan blowing air over a bucket of ice to try to cool the classroom down. This is the reality of teaching in Alberta. Growing class sizes, lack of supports are the reality of teaching in Alberta. And yet Adriana LaGrange felt it was perfectly appropriate to say that teachers are extremely well funded. She doubled down on that, though, in a kind of a strange way, because she gave Travis Toews what many saw was the kiss of death, because she endorsed him. She put out an email, ostensibly sent through the Travis Toews campaign, where she said, "Travis Toews, he's the best guy. I've always known he's the best guy. He's the guy for the job." And there's a lot of people who saw that and went, "Is that really the endorsement that you want, Travis? Is that the person that you wanted to say, hey, you know what? She digs me. Everybody else should." Happened nonetheless. Getting into the fun stuff, though. September 1st wasn't just the first day back to school. It was also Alberta Day. Now, Alberta Day is celebrated on the day that, according to some, Alberta joined Confederation. And in particular, there was a minister who had some thoughts about Alberta Day that we're going to share with you right now.
And yes, why should we celebrate? It baffles me a little bit that we've been 117 years as a province, and just now are we officially recognizing and celebrating the birth of this incredible and great province, this most wonderful place in the world to live. We need to celebrate the birthday of this province, and that's what we've begun today. I think it's so appropriate that we do it with our Indigenous people. And let me speak frankly for a few moments. There are many in our country, province, who are frustrated, maybe the reason the Fair Deal panel was even struck in the first place, that Alberta has never really been granted that full fair deal. Thank you so much. Never really been granted that full fair deal with the federal government that was promised. The family compact of Laurentian elites have always skewed the deal in their favor. And so from the start, as the Premier has said, we've faced adversity, even within Confederation. I find it interesting that Alberta was late joining Confederation. From 1867 till 1905, until Alberta joined as a province.
All right, being told that the audio on that video for some reason isn't working, so we're just going to cut right out of it. Here's the Coles notes of what Ron Orr had to say. First of all, he was incensed that up until the government had officially said that there was going to be an Alberta Day on September 1st, it hadn't been recognized before then. Except it kind of had. Not only has Jason Kenney tweeted out the last couple of years, but then the minister who had Ron Orr's job before he did, Leela Aheer, had actually tweeted out in 2020, throughout our 115-year history, Albertans have always been generous, disciplined, and creative. It is an honor to declare September 1st as Alberta Day, to celebrate our contributions to Confederation and to celebrate what it means to be Albertan. So, in 2020, Leela Aheer declared the September 1st to be Alberta Day, but Ron Orr felt that it hadn't been acknowledged previously, which is some revisionist history. But secondary from there, one of the other things that happened with Mr. Orr is he complained about the fact that despite the fact that Canada, as Confederation, was formed in 1867, Alberta wasn't, as he put it, allowed in until 1905. And that's arguably true, except it's not. The reality is, Alberta wasn't a thing before 1905. It was part of the Northwest Territories. It was only in 1905 that the Prime Minister said, you know what, maybe, okay, these folks want some provinces, maybe we should make some provinces over there, and created the province of Alberta in 1905. Fun little anecdote, one of the other things that happened with that was it was a Liberal who was the very first premier of Alberta. So Ron Orr crushing it almost as hard as we're crushing it with the audio tonight. Moving on from there, though, we got to hear about a budget surplus this week. So Mr. Kenney announced a big budget surplus. Originally, the original projections were that it was going to be in the neighborhood of about a $500 million budget surplus. But what happened with the actual budget surplus, largely because of the huge increase in prices of oil and gas, was there was a $13.2 billion surplus. Now, where that surplus comes from was very brilliantly explained by Trevor Tombe. Trevor Tombe is an economist. He's been on the show before talking about equalization. And Mr. Tombe, he raised the question and he addressed the situation when it came to where the budget came from. And he did a great little graph where you can see quite visually where the vast majority of the surplus came from. So there was a $28 billion revenue boost that came to the provincial government and the provincial coffers because of natural resources. Breaks down from there, and you can see on the graph, if you're watching on the YouTubes, you can see that it all flows through. Dr. Tombe makes amazing graphs, but you can see the flow through of the revenue to where it was spent. Now, Mr. Kenney did make some announcements in regards to where he was going to be putting some of that money. And the place where he decided to put that money primarily was actually towards some savings. So he put a boatload of money towards savings. He did a great big thing about how we were going to be putting $2.9 billion into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, which is great, but it also has some pretty major problems. One of the biggest problems is, as we've talked about on recent episodes, there are huge issues for people who rely on funding from the government in order to make ends meet. One of the biggest examples of this has to do with folks who are on programs like AISH. So as we talked about in a couple of episodes ago, people who are relying on AISH for their income, AISH, for anybody who's new to the term, is assisted income for the severely handicapped. People who are relying on AISH are relying on AISH at an amount that actually puts them below the poverty line. That's the reality. It was the UCP that actually de-indexed AISH. At the very, very end of the NDP's tenure, they stepped forward and they said, you know what? The way that we've been increasing AISH from time to time hasn't been great. We need to do a much better job of how we're doing that. So we're going to just index it to AISH, and every year we're going to take a look at how bad inflation was, whether or not inflation went up or down, and we're going to say, hey, we need to move AISH up a little bit maybe. Now, when the UCP came in, they not only said, no, we're not going to index AISH, they actually removed the ability for, they changed the payment date so that the payment date that people on AISH had gotten used to was no longer available to them. It would have been unbelievably easy for the UCP to have said, you know what? People on AISH, they're hurting. We have this 13 and change $billion surplus. There's no reason why we can't maybe help them out a little bit. Maybe we can fix some things. Maybe we can re-index it. And it would have been a really easy move because pretty much every UCP leadership candidate has said, hey, we got a problem here with AISH. We should probably do something about it. But they didn't. Instead, they took a victory lap where they bragged about the fact that once again, Alberta got lucky with oil and gas revenues. And they didn't do anything for people on AISH, which is really, really unfortunate. Moving on from there. Oh, before we do, there's a lot of people who asked, how much would it take potentially to increase AISH? How much money are we talking about? Well, friend of the show and accountant, Sarah Biggs, actually did some math. And she tweeted out a couple of days ago to bring AISH to $2,000 a month, which would be a $315 increase, which would make a huge difference for a lot of people on that program. It would cost roughly $265 million a year. We could have cut back the amount that we put into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. We could have still put in $2.65 billion into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. And we could have funded AISH to $2,000 a month, but we didn't do that. Despite the fact, like I said, multiple UCP candidates, leadership candidates, have said that would be one of the very first things they did. Moving on from there. And this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting because we're going to try to, maybe we'll just ask everybody to be patient with us for just a minute while we try to get the audio situation sorted out. Because we've got some video clips that we definitely want to play you. They're pretty good. They're pretty spicy. But we need to make sure that they actually work. So 1 second here. Fingers crossed, I figured out what I'm doing. We'll see. And a tweet to let me know if the audio is working on this, because fingers crossed I have solved the problem, and we should have some audio playing for you in just a second here from the UCP debate. The first clip that we want to play for you comes from an exchange where they were talking about education, and they were talking about how to fund education. And one of the things that came up in that conversation was Travis Toews was saying, hey, you know what?
we kept education funding stable. And there's a little bit, it's kind of hard to hear, but it's worth listening to at the very end of this.
I do. We held education funding flat for 3 years, but we honored our commitment and we didn't cut education funding. That's an ATA fallacy.
So what that was Travis Taves saying, hey, you know what? We kept education stable. And in the very background, you can hear Leela Aheer saying that is a cut. And the reason why Leela Aheer says that is quite simply because the reality is that it is a cut. When you have growing class sizes, when you have growing expenses, we've seen Mr. Kenney and the UCP talking at length, and it's certainly been a talking point for a lot of the leadership candidates, talking at length about the fact the cost of living, the cost of everything is getting so much more expensive. They're not wrong. But when you keep education funding flat and everything is getting more expensive and there's more students and you need to replace the technology, when all of that is going on, it is a cut. And so it's perfectly appropriate that Leela Aheer shouted out, that is a cut. But it got to be even more fun than that, because as we went through the evening, as we went through the debate, Mr. Taves chose to debate Leela Aheer on a question that had to do with the arts and entertainment and culture. And it's quite, hopefully, I'm really hoping that the audio plays. But if it doesn't, we'll figure something out. Go get a coffee or something. It's about 2 minutes worth of tape, but it's worth it if it works. So what you're going to hear here is the exchange between Leela Aheer and Travis Taves when it comes to the arts and culture.
Arts and heritage and cultural industries, recreation and sports contribute, just so you know, the culture industry is part of a strong economy. It's not as a result of one. It's actually part of the entire economy. $6.1 billion in our economy, and creates more than 65,000 jobs a year. And not only are we seeing that homegrown talent here, and I wanted to talk a little bit, just for a few seconds, about the film and the film tax credit. I remember, and Mr. Taves, you can probably talk about this a little bit, when we first came to you to talk about that tax credit, and that tax credit was turned away.
And just
because
like
they didn't
that,
believe in a
it's been
tax
brought to
credit.
my attention
They didn't believe that for every
the
dollar
audio
that
on
we
this
put into
isn't
the
working
film industry,
either.
that 5 would be created.
We're having
I'm
some
really
problems
glad
tonight, folks.
that the tone
So,
has changed and that came around.
Needless to
But
say,
boy, oh boy, was it
it
ever
was
hard to
quite the
convince
exchange.
a
We're gonna
conservative
skip past that
finance
segment, I
minister
guess,
to
because
invest in film.
for some reason it's
I want to apologize
not working
for
for us
having
tonight.
to see the
Video
value
clips.
proposition
Figure that out. It's pretty good
on
my screen
a
for
film
that.
and television.
Danielle Smith, coming out of the UCP debates, had a lot of drama on the high seas this week. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So to start with, one of the things that got Danielle Smith quite a bit of attention was she talked about how one of the questions that came up and has come up in several debates is, what would you do in order to demonstrate your commitment to Albertans? And she put up a tweet thread where she said, I won't speak for other candidates, but when the provincial and federal governments imposed vaccine passports and mandates, locked down schools and businesses, and watched while pastors and youth hockey players were arrested, this is what I was doing about it. Speaking out against lockdowns on radio, which is true. Challenging Premier Kenney, which is true. Losing a radio job for refusing to parrot the media line. Now that's where it gets a little bit interesting. When you think about losing something, that's generally something that happens out of your control. If you put down your car keys, you put down your car keys. If your car keys fall out of your pocket and you lost it, then you lost it. Somebody takes your car keys, you lost your car keys. There's a big difference between losing something and deliberately choosing to do something. And that tweet thread strongly contradicted Danielle Smith's statements that she released at the time when she left her job with her radio show, because she said, I took a walk in the snow and I decided it's time to go. I'll be leaving the radio stations in Chorus next month. This is my decision. I know many of you will be disappointed, so I'll try my best to explain why. So on one hand, we have Danielle Smith, who's presenting the entire situation when it's expedient as if it was out of her control. She lost her job. Like so many Albertans lost their job. No, she chose to walk away from her job because she was being told that you can't tweet things about hydroxychloroquine that aren't true. You can't make up medicine during the middle of a pandemic. But that was just the start of Smith's Week. She had a bunch of other stuff that she did. One of the other things that she promised this week was that she would make it so that post-secondary institutions could not institute really any kind of health protections if there was a resurgence of COVID or if there was some other sort of pathogen that was causing all kinds of problems. She went so far as to say she would make it illegal for schools to mandate any kind of vaccination status. She said she would make it illegal for schools to shut down and to ever do remote learning. And she said she would make it illegal for schools to do any kind of masking. Well, as with so many of Danielle Smith's other policies, it really seems like she didn't exactly think that one through. Because one of the other things that immediately came to mind for me is, what if that person's working in healthcare? Most healthcare workers know there's a list of vaccines that you need to get, not only in order to enter many programs, but in order to do practicums, which is where you go out and you do the actual medicine on actual people. Those are requirements. And in order to get into those practicum sites, you often have to follow the requirements of whatever that site is, with many healthcare sites requiring vaccination as well. But even farther from there, for people who work in healthcare settings, PPE or masks isn't new. It's something that has been required for a very, very long time. Well, if you're going to learn those skills, you got to wear the masks. And if you're going to get through the program, then you have to do the program in such a way that you get practice wearing the masks. Lots of programs test students on their ability to put PPE on or don PPE and take it off properly. Because if you don't do it properly, you put yourself at risk, you put your patients at risk, you put your family at risk. But apparently that is something that Danielle Smith didn't really think of. Because she's just going to make these blanket rules, as she does with just about everything, and kind of just hope for the best. And that's sort of the theme with her campaign. We've seen it in no greater place than the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Now, on September 1st, Mr. Kenney held that press conference with Ron Orr, where they talked about all the wonderful things that they were going to do for Alberta during Alberta Day. It was a big function celebrating Alberta's birthday, involved the Crown. So the Lieutenant Governor was there. She was in attendance for part of that ceremony. And at the end of that ceremony, she did a press conference where a bunch of reporters asked her a bunch of questions. One of those questions had to do with, so this Alberta Sovereignty Act, what would you do with that? And she gave, when you actually read the answer, a fairly responsible answer. She said, well, I would have to check with the legality of the situation and kind of go from there. I can't make any guarantees. And that's basically what the legality of her role is. It's important to remember that we still exist as a constitutional monarchy. And as much as political parties make the laws, at the end of the day, in order for a law to become a law, the Lieutenant Governor has to say, yeah, okay, that's a law now. That's the power that she has. Now, historically, the Lieutenant Governor has only on extremely rare occasions said something like, whoa, this is a bridge too far. And typically, it is only reserved for situations where the law that's being passed by the legislative body would be profoundly unconstitutional. And that's perfectly reasonable. It's good to have those sorts of safeguards in place. It's also good to know that the Lieutenant Governor wouldn't just pass every law without having some sort of legal consultation with experts, as one would argue the legislature should be doing. And certainly any act like the Alberta Sovereignty Act should be filtered through. But because she said that she would do what is required of her because she said that she would do her job, Danielle Smith lit her hair on fire. And she released a statement that included not only a whole bunch of stuff that simply wasn't true, but also a whole bunch of speculation. She requested that the lieutenant governor walk back her comments and fulfill her role appropriately. She also then doubled down on the fact nobody knows what the Alberta Sovereignty Act is or what it says because she hasn't written it yet, but she swears that it's going to be written in such a way that it will be constitutionally okay. Danielle Smith continues to flip back and forth between this idea of we're sending Ottawa a strong message and we're going to say that they're never ever going to be able to take away our rights and freedoms, and if they pass a law that we don't like, we're going to say no. We're going to say that they couldn't have arrested Tamara Litch. We're going to say that they couldn't have put in any sort of travel mandates. We're going to use, that's what the Alberta Sovereignty Act is for. The Alberta Sovereignty Act is to say no to Ottawa, but at the same time, as soon as she gets in any trouble for it, she immediately turns around and says, oh guys, I haven't written it yet. I don't actually know what it's going to say yet, but it'll be good, I promise. And this is a foundational campaign plank for her. And in fact, it even got worse in the last 48 hours because the Western Standard decided that they were going to release a story where they said, oh, you know what? Kenny, he was with the lieutenant governor on the day that she made the comment that she would make sure that every law that she signs into being would be legally valid and constitutionally valid. That's the story that the Western Standard ran on September 1st, on Alberta Day. It's no surprise that Kenny was seen with the lieutenant governor at an official government function. But here we have Danielle Smith coming out and saying this latest article is extremely alarming. Any coordination by Jason Kenney with Justin Trudeau's appointed lieutenant governor would be a serious violation of our democratic processes. And she's not wrong. But here's where taking a look at what Danielle Smith says and how she says it gets to be so important. We've had 3 years of practice with this, folks. We have seen Jason Kenney carefully position his words in such a way that he can get away with the maximum amount. Well, Danielle Smith does that, but it's on steroids. So what she says is the latest article is extremely alarming. Okay, that's an entirely subjective statement. Then she says any coordination by Jason Kenney with Justin Trudeau's appointed lieutenant governor would be a serious violation of our democratic processes. And she's not wrong. It would be. But she's not saying that it happened. She's just implying it strong enough to her audience and her followers and her base that they'll be able to read that and go, oh, Kenny's coordinating with the lieutenant governor. This is terrible. This is not responsible communications. It's certainly not responsible for somebody who is trying to seek the office of the premier. She's deliberately placing her words in such a way that they are the most misinterpretable, if that's a word, without actually coming out and saying the thing that she's trying to imply. And I would bet dollars to donuts if anybody said, Danielle, why did you say that Jason Kenney was coordinating with the lieutenant governor to try to stop your Alberta Sovereignty Act? Why did you say that? The next words out of her mouth would be, oh, but I didn't. I didn't say that. What I said was, it would be really, really bad if he did. It's this sort of disingenuous communication that allows people to jump to ridiculous conclusions that is directly responsible for the kinds of situations we see, like the deputy premier being accosted. This is a real problem that we have to figure out how we're going to handle. And I would just remind everybody once again that this is a real problem that's coming from the person who, by many reports, is the front runner in the UCP race. Moving on from there, let's talk about COVID for a sec. Since Danielle Smith has so many rules and stuffs about COVID, let's talk about COVID. There is an amazing reporter who has been doing some amazing work on putting together all kinds of graphs and information about what's been going on with COVID, not just currently, but over the last several years. And we wanted to take a sec to share a couple of those. The reporter is from CTV News Edmonton. Her name is Kira Markov. I apologize if I'm not getting the Y right. But she releases a series of graphs every once in a while where she says, okay, this is where we're at with COVID numbers. And there's some numbers that we really should be paying attention to. When you take a look at the number of deaths per month in Alberta, and you compare them 2020, 2021, 2022, we are up month over month over all of the years. In February, we had almost 200 more deaths than we did in the preceding year. In March, 60. In April, over 100. In May, almost 100 again. Now, fortunately, the deaths have dropped back down, but the reality is more people are dying from COVID in 2022 than they have in any other year during the pandemic. And we see the same thing, by and large, with hospitalizations. When you take a look at the hospitalizations, they are, for most months, double, if not more, what they were in 2021 and miles above what they were in 2020. The only good section that has any sort of good news is the ICU. The ICU admissions are actually down, and that's largely attributable to the fact that so many more people have the vaccines, they're having so many fewer outcomes. But we're walking through COVID right now like we think it's no big deal. We're walking through COVID like it's over. And the reality is, more people are dying than ever have before, year over year. More people are being admitted to hospital year over year. We're not done with COVID. COVID's not done with us. We just don't seem to be paying attention to it anymore. Moving on from there. Just a couple more, and then we're going to go to Deirdre for the rest of the show, and we're going to do the Twitter Spaces, and we'll probably be leaning heavily into the Twitter Spaces because we've had so many audio problems tonight. But moving on from there, when we're talking about major issues in Alberta, one of the other big issues that has been coming up again and again and again has to do with the opioid crisis. We are seeing huge numbers still of people who are overdosing. And one of the big problems that has been identified is the fact that the UCP government has taken an extremely non-evidence-based approach to managing opioid addiction and opioid overdoses. They've closed supervised consumption sites. They've moved supervised consumption sites to make them inaccessible. In Calgary, there was supposed to be a portable supervised consumption site bus that was going to be available, particularly in the east side of Calgary. That was shut down. And it was shut down in part under the promise that, you know what we're going to do? It's okay, guys. We hear that you're worried that we're making some of these services less accessible. We understand that, but you know what? It's going to be okay because we're going to open mini supervised consumption sites at homeless shelters. We're going to make sure that it's right there for the homeless shelters, the houseless population. They're going to be able to access those supervised consumption sites. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to have the best supervised consumption sites. They're going to be available. It's going to be great. Up until this week, when UCP Deputy Minister of Addiction and Mental Health came out and said, just kidding. We've been talking with some of the folks at the drop-in, and they're not super keen with the idea of having a supervised consumption site there. So we're not going to do it. We'll figure something out, though, down the road. We'll figure something out. And the language is particularly telling. The last paragraph of the section that we have on the screen right now: Alberta's government will continue to work with the City of Calgary, local residents, business owners, and community stakeholders to establish a more suitable overdose prevention model within Calgary than what currently exists. Now, worth noting there, it doesn't say we're going to work to find a location for a supervised consumption site. It doesn't say that. What it says is we're going to find a better model. So there's no guarantee that there's going to be any sort of additional supervised consumption sites added anywhere. And it's a bit of a bait and switch. Our last story is a little bit of a thing that we're talking about because we've got a corker of an episode coming up this week. We talked a little while ago about the amazing episode that Deirdre and Kathleen Smith did with Women of AB Poly, where they talked to Dr. Angela Grace about her experiences with potentially running as a candidate for the NDP in the next provincial election. Well, we wanted to spend a bit more time with it. So we sat down with Dr. Grace for about an hour-long conversation. And it's a spicy one. There's some things that are said that are going to be quite surprising to people. But there's some things that will be said that are not that surprising to people because there have been a lot of concerns raised with the NDP lately about how they've been treating people in regards to how they've been treating particularly nomination contestants. Now, we've done a couple of stories on this, and we kind of peaked with a conversation with two ex-NDP MLAs, one of whom, the Honorable Stephanie McLean, is an ex-justice minister and an ex-associate whip for the government. We also spoke to a couple people who had seen firsthand how the internal politics of the NDP could at times get, from what they said, extremely toxic. Well, the NDP announced finally, you know what? It's cool, guys. We're going to do an investigation into this. We were provided a copy of one of the emails that they sent out to people where they said, hey, if you're an NDP member and you want to talk about your bad experiences or the concerns that you have, please let us know. And we'll make sure that somebody from this law firm, Southern Butler Price, will speak to you because they're going to do the independent investigation. Now, right out of the bat, there's a bit of a problem there because they only sent that email to current NDP members. And a lot of people who experienced or who say that they've experienced the toxicity have left the party. So right out of the gates, the NDP seems to be stacking the deck in such a way that they're not going to be talking to the people who actually experienced some of the worst things, which is a weird take. But it gets even weirder because when you get into, when you get into who's involved in that law firm, one of the senior partners of the law firm is a lady named Jessica Bowering. She's a partner, barrister, and solicitor. That name might sound familiar to some people who have been paying attention to politics since 2015, because one of the things that happened in 2015 was a lot of people from BC, who were BC NDPers, came to Alberta to fulfill roles. And in particular, Jessica Bowering came to Alberta, and she acted as the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General. So this is somebody, the law firm that the NDP hired to do their investigation has a partner that was previously a chief of staff in the NDP government. Now, we have to say that the two lawyers that are tasked with doing the investigation don't appear to have been high-ranking members of the NDP government in the past. So there's obviously a little bit of separation there. But it's really not the greatest optics when, of all of the law firms that the NDP could have chosen to do a robust investigation of the accusations that have been levied towards them in regards to how they're treating candidates, how they're disqualifying candidates when there's no constitutional mechanism for them to do so. Maybe you could go with a law firm that didn't have one of your besties as a partner. Just spitballing. That episode with Dr. Grace is going to be coming out on Thursday. It'll be going up on Patreon early for our Patreon sponsors. And this is where I'm going to do my mid-show Patreon plug. For our Patreon sponsors, they get early access. And it's because we have two FOIP requests that we're still waiting to hear from. And it's because of the support that we get from our Patreon supporters that we're able to pay for those things and apparently also pay for the audio that on some days decides not to work. All of that being said, this is where we open it up. So if I've said something that you didn't particularly like, this is where we want to hear from you. And also, we've got Deirdre Mitchell-McLean, who is going to be, she's got a national, let's go with story, that is going to be significantly important. So Deirdre, how are you doing tonight? I can hear you. I don't know what's going on with the tech here tonight, but I can hear you. You can hear me, so we're gonna call it a win for now. How's your week been? How you doing? Here we are. So you kind of sent me a little bit of a heads up on what your federal story of the week was.
They are looking for submissions to be received by early September in order to be included when the hearings start up again on September the 19th. However, they will accept submissions from the public until October the 31st. So, as quick as you can. There's a little bit of a time limit on that one.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing to highlight in particular because, you know, one of the things that we've seen, especially in Alberta, is that the people who were supportive of the convoy and the blockades are extremely organized. They have really, really strong social media networks where they are able to share all of this stuff and say, hey, make all of your grievances public. But it's not something that the average person is necessarily fairly well engaged with. So that's probably a really important thing for people to take the time to do. If you could tweet that link out after the show, Deirdre, I'll make sure that we amplify it over here as well.
Yes, I will.
Perfect. So if you're done with that piece.
I am. Yeah, that was the big thing.
Okay. What were your sort of takeaways for the big things of the week?
So that was also kind of a fun week, right? with the Sovereignty Act and stuff. Now, I don't know if anyone else is getting candidate emails. I am. I don't always open them because I'm getting like 5 a day. And one that came in from Brian Jean, I think Friday, said that Smith was going to release some text of the Alberta Sovereignty Act so that people could see it before they vote. Now, he's the only one that I'm seeing saying this. I don't see anything from Smith, and I don't see any other media covering that. But, you know, I think you captured it perfectly well when you said, you know, which Sovereignty Act are you talking about? Are you talking about something that's actually going to be constitutional? Or are you talking about the one that is going to allow you to do all of these things that's essentially not something the provincial government can do?
Well, this is where I get I'll say confused because she did. I suspect what Mr. Jean is referring to. And it was, I did see that email as well. And I got a little giggle out of it because it almost seemed like he was trying to say, hey, Danielle, thanks for listening to my suggestion, which I don't think was the case at all. But in her big statement where she said, oh, that friggin' lieutenant governor, she did say that she would be releasing some particulars of the Sovereignty Act, including the mechanics, and she put a heavy emphasis on the mechanics side, and that's sort of where it was. Now, this is, again, it's one of those things. Well, what are we talking about here? Because on one hand, she's saying, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna show you some of the cards, guys. It's cool. I promise. I swear." But on the other hand, her whole justification up until this point, on the more soft approach to the Sovereignty Act, I guess, has been it's going to be written in conjunction with caucus. It's going to be written in conjunction with constitutional lawyers. We're going to make sure this thing is bulletproof. So, like, again, it's that, you know, like I said, which Sovereignty Act are we talking about? Are we talking about the one that you're going to write with caucus under the advice of constitutional lawyers? Or are we talking about the one that maybe some law firms wrote for you already? Which one?
That's where a lot of the confusion has come from, because if you look at, so the three authors of the Free Alberta Strategy, the ones who actually have recommended the Alberta Sovereignty Act, whatever text Danielle Smith has seen and basically agreed to, I guess, is what happened. But the three authors, so you've got Dr. Barry Cooper of the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Calgary. And he wrote an article for, I believe, the National Post, and he's the one who said that it is unconstitutional, and it's unconstitutional on purpose.
Yeah. Right.
So that author, you know, Derek Frum is a constitutional lawyer. He wrote an opinion piece that appeared in the Edmonton Journal and Calgary Herald, so National Post, a couple of days ago, and you know, I've heard, like I said, I've heard this stuff before. I've heard it from the separatist crowd. This is it's identical. This is something that they all really believe. And one of the things I got out of Frum's opinion piece was when he was talking about, you know, how from the time of William Aberhart and up to Preston Manning. And as I was looking into all of this, because I had to get more information, well, okay, so what exactly was Bill Aberhart, or Bible Bill? What was he really doing that has people so excited about this idea of more separation of powers? And you know, the man was like he started his own Bible school, and one of the first people in and the first graduate from that Bible school was Ernest Manning, Preston's father. So Ernest Manning became a protege of William Aberhart, and Preston Manning came up, weirdly enough, exactly the same way. So to me, this is just the oral history of Western alienation that came from like one person. And William Aberhart, his government was the first to actually put in recall legislation, and his constituents got the signatures to have him recalled, and his government, rather than actually allow this to happen, retroactively repealed the law so they couldn't do it. And so,
Bible Bill had some eccentricities, let's say.
He did. And I mean, like I said, this is all just, it's so circular. A lot of this sentiment. And the thing is, like, while I could agree, I went pretty deep. And before Aberhart was elected, because he was elected in 1935, right? And so what was going on? Well, there was a Great Depression in 1935, especially in the Western provinces. How did we get the nickname the Dust Bowl? Because there were crops in Saskatchewan that didn't grow for 9 years. There was a huge problem for the Western provinces during that time. And a lot of it actually came out of the way that the division of powers and what each area was responsible for. So municipalities at the time were responsible for unemployment benefits. Between that and farms that were basically couldn't make their payments to creditors, the provinces were the 4 Western provinces were on the brink of insolvency. The federal government had to step in, and this was before, like I said, before Aberhart was elected. But the feds stepped in and helped everything out, made it so that the provinces didn't go under. And it was a bad time for the country itself, just in general. I think it was a bad time for all of the governments. But Canada was having a pretty sticky time, and yet still, came in. Saskatchewan was declared too big to fail. Saskatchewan was declared too big to fail. And so there's quite a bit of history there, and I'm honestly, every time I dig into it, I kind of wonder, so how is it again that we're so alienated because Ottawa treats us so badly? Every time I look into it, I find that I actually come away going, well, that was a good thing, wasn't it? Not letting the Western provinces become insolvent. That seems like a good thing at the time. I'm not sure. Maybe it wasn't, but
it's funny that you talk about how interconnected all of these things are, because and I know that we've talked about this before on the show, but it's just such it's what got us blocked by Danielle Smith, so I love talking about it. When we're talking about 2 of the authors of that whole strategy, we're talking about 2 lawyers who have a law firm in Airdrie, I believe it is. And that's the same law firm that Danielle Smith, I don't know, contracted is the right word or not, to launch her lawsuits against the governments in regards to vaccine choice, because there was a period where Johnson & Johnson wasn't available in Canada. And so she wanted to sue everybody, I guess, in order to make sure that all Albertans had all of the vaccines to choose from. Now, nothing ever came of that lawsuit.
No, because we ended up bringing Johnson & Johnson in.
Yeah. But the fun thing about that whole story for me is she raised over $100,000, and she has never provided any kind of accounting for where that money went, other than to say, well, there was $30,000 in a retainer account that we gave to the lawyers, and that all got donated to the JCCF, because of course it did, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. But the other $71,000 and change, I think it is, she's never said where that money went. It just went away, I guess. And it's wildly entertaining to me that the law firm that she used to launch this lawsuit that never happened and raise all of this money on GoFundMe is the same law firm that wrote her Free Alberta strategy and allegedly the mechanics, I'll say, for the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Don't ask her about that on Twitter. You'll get blocked.
Yeah.
Are you blocked by Smith yet?
I'm not. Actually, Smith follows me. So that happened quite a while ago. But I tend to subtweet more than usually ever respond to or quote tweet a politician. I just subtweet. It does keep me from getting blocked.
Yeah, we just straight up asked her, hey, where'd the other 70,000 go? And then within, I don't know, 5 minutes we were blocked or something like that. So
yeah, I honestly, because we debated with Women of AB Poly, do we try and get all of the candidates in? And I said, and you know, there may or may not have been a co-host of mine who was like, there's no way in hell I'm talking with Danielle Smith. And allegedly that could have happened. And I said, well, it doesn't really seem like, yes, I'm not going to invite everybody because it's Women of AB Poly. But I'm like, I'm not going to leave out, one person at the same time. And then we got, you know, a couple of campaigns that were like, you know, wait until after membership closes and things. And we were just like, you know what, don't bother, because this is like, I've steered away from MLAs anyways, because I find that they're always on message and it just bothers me. I don't want to talk to someone who's on message.
well, it's tricky when you're talking to folks like that, because you know it's like when you take a look at any of many politicians' interviews or public statements. Like I think I go back to the interview that Shandro had with, I want to say it was CBC at noon or something recently, where he was talking about the provincial police force. And man, I did not envy that host, because they're operating on such a compressed time frame where they've got like, you've got 15 minutes. That's what you get. And then we have to do the next show. And he opened up with this barrage of, I'll call it unmitigated bullshit. And he just kept going with it. And the poor host, like, there were a couple of times where she was like, hey, this thing that you're saying, it's not great. And I'm not sure if that's technically true, but he would embed so many falsehoods in a sentence that trying to,
Where do you start?
yeah, like, well, okay, I guess that's going to take a half hour to unpack, and we're not talking about anything else. Like it's a lot of work. And especially when you're operating on such a limited time frame, it's really difficult.
It is, yeah. And like, no, I've got, you know, I read, like I said, I read their emails. I keep up with a lot of the interview things, but also, you know, stuff that they do that isn't to a public sphere so much. right? So that's where I'm attending Manning conference things. They're more open. They're just more open when they believe that they're just talking to their base. So that's the other reason why I spend so much time around these things, is because they say different things to different people. And
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you
yeah,
take a look at the tone. Tuesday's debate. You take a look at the tone that a certain three candidate, except for, and I'll give him loose credit for this, the one candidate in the UCP leadership race who I think has at least been consistent has been Todd Lowen, because he doesn't change his rhetoric. He is that dude is committed. But you compare the rhetoric from Brian Jean and from Danielle Smith on Tuesday to the Alberta Prosperity Project debate, and two totally different beasts.
yes, yeah, it absolutely was. And I mean, from the little bit that I caught, I woke up. And went. There was a bunch of messages in a group chat. They were all talking about the debate, and I was like, "Oh my God, no! I've missed the debate." It started an hour and a half before I had woken up, and so yeah, so I tried to watch a little bit. I didn't know what the question was. I was just like, "Okay, I'm too lost to do this." And the only thing that I'd gotten out of it, that little bit that I tuned in, was when Sonny was going after Smith about the ASA, and Smith argued for a rebuttal and got it, and said, "I'd argue there's already a mandate for this." So that was the only thing that I caught, but it stuck with me. And there were some disagreements on the Twitters, very similar to the ones that were happening around the LG, and it kind of depended on where you sat on the political spectrum, I found. So I also go back and forth between those Facebook groups that are full of conservatives, because they say something very, very different than what I see regularly on Twitter. But I do see the amount of accounts that are liking Danielle Smith's tweets. There's going to be someone else. There's going to be conservatives talking about conservative stuff on Twitter. Like, there has to be.
I don't know if they do. I think that there's probably a lot of politicos who are employed or who have more than one account. And I mean, we certainly have seen bot farming in Alberta on more than one occasion. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's some bots for hire. But one of the other things that I think is fascinating is I've sort of been watching her metrics as well, I'll say, and there's a lot of Americans on there. There's a lot of Americans on there. Like, you take a look at, and even this was what got me looking at it, was I was trying to make sense of, like, how in the holy heck does the Alberta Prosperity Project get the traction that they do on Facebook? And they are deploying a very deliberate strategy where they're quite literally posting their stuff to American groups talking about freedom and all of the freedom things. And you take a look at who's liking and sharing, and they're like from Missouri.
That's helpful.
Yeah, and so I cannot say that I've done like a comprehensive analysis of all of her Twitter stuffs, but I have noticed that every once in a while when I go like, oh, I wonder who's liking this stuff today, I notice that it's very, very clearly there's a few accounts that I don't think are going to be voting in the UCP leadership race.
Yeah. Okay. So that also doesn't really surprise me. I am kind of like I follow politics, right? Like, unless you're throwing in anti-vax stuff, I had to start unfollowing those people. But if people tweet about politics, I don't really care if I agree with your opinion or not. But I tend to follow them because I'm there for the politics. And so I've actually kind of been a little surprised that when I've gone through some of Danielle's tweets, I don't follow any of those people. Like, not one. And I find that...
Are like most of their tweets in Cyrillic?
Yeah. Comic Sans. Yeah, it's I mean, it's just it's a different group, right? And so I think this is something that, you know, the Conservatives really got upset about the LG's comments, the Lieutenant Governor's comments, and I actually thought Janet French's article was the fairest that I've seen. And when I'm calling it fair, because Catherine Grabowski did, you know, give us what the exact quote was from the LG when they had asked about it, and I didn't think that that was a fair representation to put the whole quote in like that. But when I read Janet's, in my mind, the spirit of what she was saying, which was, okay, yeah, I don't want to speculate on a bill that doesn't exist yet, but you know, here's my role.
Yeah.
I liked that constitutional fire extinguisher. However, I do understand where some of the Conservatives were coming from when they were saying, you know, convention. Like, yes, the role still allows for the Lieutenant Governor to reserve royal assent while they figure some of this stuff out. But I mean, look at the turn off the taps bill, right? Everyone knew that was going to be challenged, that it was very likely going to be unconstitutional because you can't turn off the taps to the other province.
Well, that's one of the reasons why Kenny didn't push forward with it right away, because
but he proclaimed it on the 18th of May.
Was it that fast?
It was that fast. Yeah. So Horgan challenged it as soon as it received royal assent, and it received royal assent in 2018. Also May, actually. So it was May 18th that it was passed in the ledge, and it received, or maybe it was the 12th, and then it received royal assent on the 18th. Now, arguably, it was unconstitutional at the time, but it received royal assent, and Horgan challenged it almost immediately, and the justice reserved his decision in June of 2018. And nothing really happened until Kenny got in, and then he proclaimed it very quickly. On the, let's see, it was still, or wait a minute, maybe it was 2019 that the judgment was reserved, but one of the two. And they basically, nothing happened with it because Kenny didn't actually turn off the taps.
Yeah.
So there's a sunset clause within the turn off the taps legislation.
That's right.
It was
Yeah.
also known as something else. But so when the 2 years were up and it had expired, that's when it started to hit the news again. So that would be in 2021. And they did rewrite it, taking out some of those things that they knew were unconstitutional. So even if you want to go by, let's say, precedents, the LGs since 1937 have tended to approve what the legislature approves.
Yep.
And what the legislature passes, they've given royal assent to it, and then the courts have come into play. And I mean, that could even be because of how bad it was when John Bowen did that in 1937, right? Like, you know, the government took away his house. They kicked him out of his house. So it was pretty bad. There was a lot of bad blood for 70 years, actually. It was Tommy Kwong in 2008 who actually finally fixed the rift in the families and brought some stuff back to Government House that was Bowen's. But there was a lot of bad blood for a long time. So maybe just convention said, you know what, we're just going to put this and let the courts do their thing if it turns out that this needs to be fought in court. Convention is that the LG and Governor General that they pass this stuff believing that the Legislative Assembly is acting in good faith and they're not trying to pass unconstitutional legislation.
Yeah. But I mean, that's where the Alberta Sovereignty Act gets so squirrely because, as you said earlier, one of the authors has been like, "Oh no, it's totally unconstitutional."
Yeah, we did that on purpose. You're like, okay.
Yeah, like if you've said, "Oh no, we're trying to be unconstitutional," and then you pass that law, I feel like that's probably one of the exceptions where the lieutenant governor would have the rights to say, I mean, you guys, you kind of said the quiet
Here's what
part
I
out
found.
loud here. So I want to tag somebody in here for a sec because there was one other thing that happened this week that I mean, it came out of the Alberta Prosperity Project debates, and I was honestly there was this naive, optimistic little part of me that was kind of looking at that whole thing, going, "Oh, maybe this will just go away. Maybe this won't be a thing." But Mr. Brian Jean decided that he was going to double down hard on it in a mail out this week, which was to me spectacularly. I'm trying not to use that particular turn of phrase anymore, so I'll say short-sighted. And he
Ludicrous.
yeah. I'm trying to tee it up here for the who I'm hoping is going to turn their microphone on in a sec. But he went after the trans community something hard and really painted what is a complex, I would argue in many ways, science-driven conversation in a very oversimplified and I would argue hurtful, said the middle-aged cis straight white guy, tone. But we've got somebody here, and I've been sending her a couple of messages in the background. I'm hoping that she might be willing to tag in here. Anna, if you've got some thoughts on that, I would love to give you the mic and hear them.
Hey, Nate.
Hey, there we are. Okay, good. I was like, oh man, are we having more technical problems tonight?
No, you definitely aren't. And happy Calgary Pride.
I was just gonna say that we could not do this episode. As soon as I saw you pop in, I was like, "There's no way that we can't hit on this."
Yeah, no, thanks so much. And, I think you teed it up perfectly. So essentially, as we went into the final weekend of Calgary Pride, we saw Brian Jean, who, to be clear, is not just only a leadership candidate for the United Conservative Party, someone who is running to be the next premier of Alberta, but this is also someone who is actually elected to the Alberta legislature and sits as a member of the Legislative Assembly for the for Fort McMurray Lac La Biche. And we saw him initially make comments in a debate that it dog whistled to anti trans rhetoric. So speaking about sexuality should not be taught in schools, biology only, that he doesn't believe that people who went through puberty as males should compete against women. And for those who may not be up to date on where the current vitriol towards transgender folks is, the reality is that there is people are stoking fear that somehow trans folks who compete in sport, particularly trans women, are somehow at an advantage and completely disregarding what the actual science and what smart medical people have said, which is that is fundamentally not true. We know that for trans women who undergo hormone replacement therapy or undergo any kind of affirming surgery, this changes the biology and the physiology of that person. just hormone replacement therapy alone. It changes muscle mass, it changes upper body strength, etc., etc. So it's fear mongering, and it is hurtful, and it's dehumanizing, and it, quite frankly, is, dog whistling to a group of folks within this populist Trumpism, alt right, very, I wouldn't call it conservative, because I know conservatives. I have friends on, across party lines who very much understand that, that trans folks need access to healthcare, and trans folks are valid. So it's very much this very, very uh, completely uh, alt kind of thinking, and alt right that is playing on it. And so those were the comments, and very much like you said, you thought that it would probably end there, but it didn't. We saw Mr. Jean come out on Friday morning, sending out an email to the folks, essentially doubling down on his comments, going even further, to say that anyone with common sense should be able to say these things, and if you believe in what I'm saying, then please donate here, with a button and a link to do so. And it is not lost on anyone that, first and foremost, doing this on what us political nerds like to call Takeout Trash Day, which is on a Friday of a weekend. This is almost more of a Takeout Trash Day, because it was the Friday of a long weekend. But adding insult to injury, this was also the Friday before Calgary Pride on Sunday, today. So while all of that is happening, you have the UCP coming out, and their director of comms, saying to media outlets how disappointed they are to be excluded, to say to media outlets that by the UCP being turned away from the Calgary Pride Parade, that Albertans are being excluded, that the UCP continues to ensure that Alberta is the best place in the world, regardless who you love or how you express your gender identity. So, you have your comms person coming out and, essentially crying foul that, we should be able to march. We should be there. We're these big, huge allies. You have MLA, former minister, and current leadership Schultz going out and saying that, by the UCP not being allowed to march, Calgary Pride has sent a message that conservatives aren't welcome, and we're a party of inclusion, and Pride does not want to promote equality and celebrate diversity together. And I'm sorry, but if I may be so blunt and crude, but it's bullshit. So I know people who are conservatives. In fact, I marched in Pride Parade, and Greg McLean, Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, was in the audience and marched, and he shouted to me, he smiled, gave each other a hug. We met up at the festival, had a great conversation. So the double standard, the complete the complete tone deafness of the United Conservative Party to come out and call out Calgary Pride, when Pride essentially, they weren't, they're not being excluded. Calgary Pride says to a lot of different folks that, what, maybe you need to take some time and maybe reflect on your actions, and why do you want to march in the parade? Like, maybe rather than starting your journey of allyship along the parade route, maybe you should take some time and start your allyship and your actions that demonstrate that in other ways, especially when you are the government empower, and you've done things like weaken legislation on GSAs, when you have things like a leadership candidate who happens to be an MLA coming out and attacking transgender Albertans. So maybe address those things. Maybe, look at, your lack of movement on things like healthcare for trans folks. Like, those are things that if you were out and doing those things, and then, folks were saying, no, you can't, we would rather you not march with us, then yeah, maybe I would say they have a bit of a leg to stand on. But crying foul in this way, it's yeah, it's exhausting. It is so exhausting, Nate, to continually have to debate my very existence as a transgender woman, and to constantly have to dispel these myths that we are the boogeymen and women in the closet. And it's exhausting, and I just hope that allies understand what this type of dog whistling from Brian Jean does. It puts me in danger. It puts kiddos in danger, because we know for a fact that hate crimes in the province of Alberta are up by 39% in the last year alone, specific towards folks and their sexuality, recognizing that gender identity is very different than sexuality. And we know that number, quite frankly, is low, because not everyone's going to be reporting hate crimes.
Yeah.
So our lives are at risk, and that is not fear mongering. It really is not. This is the reality. This is the reality. When you have folks like Brian Jean, and when you have people in power who stay silent, like Rebecca Schultz, like Rajan Sani, like Leela here, while I love I appreciate the love and I love the reshare, I would much more appreciate seeing them come out and get together and say, this is not who we are. We do not agree with our colleague in the legislature and our opponent in leadership, and this is how we're going to action it. But instead, Rajan Sani sent out an email saying Happy Labor Day, long weekend, and Leela here sent out an email saying this is the kind of leader that I'm going to be. So I mean, great, but again, it's silence, and silence is deafening. So that's where we're at with Brian Jean.
So
and the UCP.
Can I ask you two things I'd love to get your perspective on, because I would love to get it. The first one is, there's a part of me that, when we have leadership candidates and these people in elected office pontificating on these issues, there's a part of me that kind of goes like, why are you even talking about this? Like, you're running to be the premier of the province. Unless you're going to do something legislative, like, why are you including in your platform, in your campaign, your bigoted perspectives on LGBTQ2S plus issues? Like, why are you even doing that?
Well, I think, I mean...
There's probably a question there, but I can't get to it right now.
No, I mean, I think part of it is that they're playing to a specific base, right? They're playing to a base, or at least who they think the base of the United Conservative Party is at the moment. And I mean, again, if I go back to Greg McLean is a federal conservative. He was at Pride. He watched Pride. He went to the festival, and we had a conversation about the comments that Brian Jean, and I mean, member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, Greg McLean, literally said, like, so that's the sword he's going to die on. Like, so that's like that's a non-issue. That's not an issue that should be being brought up. And he is also just as flabbergasted, which you would think if your federal counterparts are even looking at you, going like, why are you opening this can of worms? That would be your hint to don't go there. But here we are. He has gone there, and so I think that although right now these comments aren't attached to a policy, we need to recognize that if Mr. Jean is successful in his bid for leadership, he will become the premier of the province. He will become the leader of a party that currently has a stronghold majority in the legislature. It's not like, you become leader and instantaneously we go into this general election. For all intent and purposes, this person will be premier for at least 6 months.
Yep.
You can do a lot of damage in 6 months. I mean, Jason Kenney, in his first 100 days, weakened legislation on gay-straight alliances. He made it, more likely that students will be outed to their parents because, weakened and put that in. He made it so that schools did not have to immediately respond to requests. That was within 100 days. So I'm not good at math, but I like to think there's more than 100 days in 6 months.
Almost double it.
They're right. So while yes, right now it's not attached to this is the policy I'm going to do, this gives a good precursor to the kind of policy that very likely could come from someone like Brian Jean.
Well, and we've seen this. I mean, one of the other pieces that you didn't mention in there that I think is important to highlight is the whole conscience rights piece. Like,
yes.
if they're going to go down the road, and they tried to introduce it. Let's not forget that. But if they're going to go down the road of saying, people have the right to effectively exclude people or put people at risk or deny them health care because of their own personal conscience. If you're going to say that those conscience rights extend to a physician, where you can say, hey, I don't want to give any sort of referrals or anything for somebody who's trying to navigate things, then it's not a big leap to say if the sports organization du jour wants to say, well, it's against our conscience to have a trans person competing, so we're not going to. This is a government that could potentially deliver that to them.
Well, and so you're 100% right on Bill 206, which that was the thankfully failed private members bill by Dan Williams. And absolutely, it would have been catastrophic to everything from reproductive health care to trans health care, for all the reasons that you mentioned. And I mean, we have to also look, so in terms of the debate that's being had about sports and denying access to trans, gender diverse, non-binary individuals, it's only as recently as 2016 that the Human Rights Act of Canada and the Criminal Code of Canada, along with the Alberta Human Rights Act, were amended to include gender identity as a protected grounds. So that's only 6 years that, trans folks in Alberta and, for all intent and purposes, trans Canadians have actually been, included and had any kind of protection under the law. So if we look at, human rights and the way that it's written, which you'll have to forgive me at 936, but roughly, more or less saying that, you cannot refuse service or entry, et cetera, based upon all of these protected grounds, and with gender identity being one of them. So if a sports organization wants to go and say to someone, you are not allowed to compete because of the fact that you are a transgender woman or a transgender man, quite frankly, now I'm not a lawyer, so, and, I'm sure maybe perhaps a lawyer might have a different argument, but in my mind, it's as simple as you are literally in violation of the Human Rights Act, both provincially and federally. And you know what? Quite frankly, if your organization wants to violate Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code of Canada, then what would be wonderful to see bold leadership by politicians and cultural leaders to say, then you don't have a place in Canada. Now, I recognize for some athletes, their jaws may have just hit the floor, but here's the deal, folks. Athletes are not losing their lives from not attending the Olympics. Athletes are not losing their lives from, not being able to compete in, the world, whatever it is, of sports. Trans people are losing their lives because of hate, ignorance, intolerance, exclusion, and dehumanization. And, doing the right thing is not always the easy thing. And so, quite frankly, that's what I would hope to see, is that, with these recent decisions by the IOC and others, it's time for Canada to put its money where its mouth is, and really truly take a strong position and say, you know what? In Canada, we value human rights. We value all human rights. We believe that trans women are women and trans men are men. Not only do we believe that, we know that to be true based on science, based on medical facts. And so anyone who wants to make this an issue or exclude people based upon this, we're not interested. We are not interested in you setting up shop here, in participating in any event that you put on. And so that's where it is for me anyways, because like I said, I'm exhausted. We are exhausted, and we need allies to step up. And many are, and many are doing, the work and putting that in. There's so much to celebrate, Nate. Like it is Pride in Calgary. This is the last night parade, record numbers of attendance, a record number of parade entries. In fact, there were more parade entries in Calgary Pride than the Calgary Stampede parade. So that's quite remarkable. So there's lots to celebrate, right? Like the federal government putting forward a federal action plan and $100 million of funding. If we look at former Progressive Conservative Premier Alison Redford being the first to raise the Pride flag over the dome of the Alberta Legislature, refunding gender reaffirming surgery in this province. So like there's many folks out there. Like this is not just this goes beyond partisan lines. We've seen all different political stripes, all different types of folks do some really wonderful and amazing things. And so that's where it is. It's kind of sort of a call to action for those who are UCP members or supporters or progressive, conservative, whatever you want to paint yourself as. This is the call to action to you need to speak up. You need to say that this is, if you want to go and give media comment that says we are a party that celebrates inclusion and are trumpeting and being champions of diversity and celebrating that, you kind of have to prove that. You can't just say it. You actually have to put action behind your words.
Yeah, to me, it's always been that conversation about what has happened with social conservatism versus what I would call probably pragmatic conservatism. One would think that it would be better for the brand if they said, hey, we don't like bigots and we're not going to do bigoted things. I can't help but think that they would probably get a little bit more support than less, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, you even saw, so it's, in this last federal election, there was a trans woman who ran for the federal Conservatives out in BC. And, you look at, down in the States, there are 2 LGBTQIA plus folks who are members of the Republican Party. Like it's like these folks exist in all parties, but more than, beyond that, it's I don't understand how you at the end of the day, yes, you're running to to be leader of the party, and we know that leadership races are not designed to appeal to the masses. We know that they're designed to appeal to a very particular group of individuals, which is the membership of that party. But that's also a bit worrisome when, like, it's like, if this is what, because again, without calling it out, the other candidates, the other MLAs, because that's the thing. Let's put the leadership race aside. Where is the government? Where is the premier calling out his MLA? Where are the other MLAs who sit in the Legislative Assembly alongside MLA Brian Jean? Where are they to call this out? So you are, again, your silence is giving permission for this. Your silence is emboldening and empowering the statements of Mr. Jean to say that, yeah, in fact, this is the party that we are. Even if we know that that's not that's not the reality, that there, I'm sure there are some great folks in there. When you don't say anything, you let it, you give it, you embolden it. So again, I appreciate being retweeted and shared. I am not a member of the Legislative Assembly. I am not a member of Parliament. I am not the Premier. My voice does not carry the same weight as theirs. If they were standing up, if they were writing and putting into their own words why this email, not only the comments in a debate, but an email that is not only talking about it, but fundraising off of it, why it is unacceptable, why it is harmful, and why it does not represent who we are, not just as a party, but as Albertans.
Very well said. Very well said. I want to say happy Pride to you, Anna.
Happy Pride, Nate.
And for what it's worth, I think that what Mr. Jean said is gross.
Thank you, Nate.
I know that's not nearly enough. Like, it just feels like not nearly enough, but it is. It's there was so much about that email that I was just like, I don't know why you did this, man. Like, I don't know why you did this.
Well, and I mean, this is the other, like, I mean, at Pride today, like, there are folks who remember, Brian Jean attending, Pride events, in the past, and coming off as being this big ally. And they also are, like, essentially, like, there's lots of folks who are calling out the hypocrisy of Brian Jean. And so it's, again, I think for some folks who are currently running in that leadership, they've seen our neighbors to the south. They've seen a level of a type of populism that, for whatever reason, they think is their winning ticket to winning power, and they've decided to bring that, to bring that brand and that style of politics into their leadership race. And it's a dangerous game they're playing. They're playing with fire, and at the end of the day, it's not them that are going to get burned. It's Albertans that are going to get burned. And so, again, I'm hopeful. Like, again, there's some really great folks out there on all. Like, this is not a partisan issue. This should be a nonpartisan issue, and there are great folks in of all stripes and colors and identities, and and we're trying, but again, the people with power also need to be the ones to pick up, to stand alongside and help us, because without them, I can get on my soapbox on Twitter as many times as people like. Hopefully, I haven't scared your audience away.
I think our audio problems earlier did that. If anything, you've brought people back in.
So, like we can have this conversation on Twitter all that we want. At the end of the day, it would be nice to move on to other things, more important things, rather than debating the existence and the rights of trans, two-spirit, gender diverse folks. But anyways, happy Pride, Nate, and yeah, thank you for letting me ramble.
Anytime at all. Anytime at all. I always enjoy conversations with you, Anna. We've got Lynn is hanging out.
Hi, Nate.
How's it going, Lynn?
Listen, you guys are smarter than me, but you know that I am in Brian Jean's riding. When I saw him put that out, I immediately responded on Facebook to him to meet me at the Pride crosswalk and have a discussion. I haven't heard back from him, of course, but I am totally disgusted by the route he is taking. I am a Christian. I know a lot of people who go to his church who do not understand why he did this.
Yeah.
Hello?
No, I'm here. I was just taking that in.
It's just absolutely, you know, as a Christian, you want to think that you look at all people equally, no matter what their stance in life or what their anything. Like, you're just people. And I had a gay brother-in-law who passed away from AIDS, and this just disturbs me beyond reality. Like, the only reason I'm still a member of the UCP is to vote, and I still have no clue who I'm going to vote for, but it definitely is not Brian G.
Yeah.
And my husband asked me this morning, he said, who are you going to vote for? And I said, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Like, who do I vote for who doesn't hold these ridiculous 1920 stances?
It's a tough, like, I know that's one thing that a lot of people are struggling with, simply because the field is so polarized, and I think that there are some more, I mean, I'll ask Deirdre to weigh in after this, but I think that there are some more moderate candidates out there who don't share these sort of bigoted views, but who historically, at least, haven't advocated as effectively or as aggressively as I think a lot of people in the affected communities would have liked them to. Whether it was fear, whether it was, you know, who knows, sky's the limit of things that can make people not do the right thing. But
Well, if Deirdre can tell me who to vote for, I'll listen to her.
Okay, Deirdre, there you go. Tell Lynn who to vote for. That's what we're doing on the breakdown tonight.
Okay, so I am currently 3 houses away from my own house because I'm having my own connection issues. So
There's got to be solar flares or something going on tonight that are just...
Northern Lights are out.
Oh, so solar flares. And Deirdre I think we might have lost Deirdre again. Oh, wait, there you are.
So I don't tell people who to vote for. However, I am going to put on a Zoom, and we'll talk about the candidates, and we'll talk.
We'll share that Zoom down the road, and hopefully when Deirdre does that Zoom, she'll have a better internet connection, and there will be fewer solar flares, and all of the technical things will not be as problematic. Because boy, we're having us a night over here. I mean, the best answer that I would offer Lynn, just before we wrap things up here, is I would say, you know, reach out to members of the communities that are going to be the most, I'll say, at risk and vulnerable by the outcome of this race, and say, who do you think? I mean, I know that I've had conversations with a few folks from different communities asking exactly that question, because, you know, on the privilege ladder, I'm pretty high up there, and you know, I take a look at some of the folks who are far more, I'll say, vulnerable than me, and those are the people that I tend to lose sleep over. So I would say reach out to some of those folks and say, hey, which one is the least scary to you, and then go from there.
But the problem, Nate, is that a lot of those people that I've spoken to don't even vote.
Well, that's a whole separate
Yeah.
problem, conversation, all of the things. But you know what? Maybe next week we will plan on a little bit of a roundtable at the end of the thing, and we'll ask everybody to share their thoughts, and we'll see if maybe some people can have some opinions. Lord knows none of the candidates, except maybe Ahir, would be a part of that conversation with us, but maybe we can get some folks to share some thoughts and some things. Anything else you want to throw out there, Len?
No, I just appreciate everything that you're doing.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Thank you. All right. Deirdre, I don't know if you've got enough of a connection for any final thoughts, but I'm getting close to the same battery problems that I had earlier or last week. So anything else you want to add before we shut things down?
I guess I want to thank Anna for you know, what she offered for us tonight. I heard the majority of it when my connection existed, and yeah, I guess just thanks everybody for coming in and listening, and especially for sharing.
I think what I'm going to do, if it's okay with you, Anna, I'm going to ask you this. You know, no pressure. I'm just asking you on the air, as it were. Given that the front end of this particular episode of the breakdown was such an audio train wreck, I'm thinking that I might, if it's okay with you, Anna, I'm just going to put the Anna part of the conversation out as a podcast tomorrow, because I think you said some important things that people need to hear. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that's fine with me, Nate.
Awesome. There we go. Impromptu solutions to ridiculous technical problems and solar flares. I think that's about it for tonight, because I got 2 batteries that are about to die and apparently a boatload of technical problems to troubleshoot. So I want to thank again everybody who listened tonight. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, which has been a delightful conversation by and large with Anna Murphy. And thank you for listening to that. We will be back next week to have a big conversation. We're going to try to center it around maybe some voting recommendations for people who are struggling for who to vote for in the UCP leadership race. And watch for Thursday, because we've got our conversation with Dr. Angela Grace, and it's a barn burner. I know I say that about a lot of our episodes, and I mean it about a lot of our episodes, but in particular, the revelations that Dr. Grace brings to the table about how she was treated by certain powers that be within the NDP, and the way that, quite frankly, they tried to misrepresent what she has done over her career is it's pretty shocking, is what I'll say. So we're dropping that on Thursday. Tuesday for our Patreon sponsors. Thank you again, everybody, for hanging out, sticking around. We will see you next week. Take care of yourselves and keep the conversation going.